We're on the same
When I
side.
woke up this morning, I was feeling pretty dangerous.
Nothing about the past, nothing about the future.
Welcome back to Draftvice. My name is Walter, and today we are talking about the Cleveland Browns. And today I also have a guest. He's going to be on for two parts, right? It's a two-part episode. First part, Cleveland Browns exclusive, right? Why? Because this guy is a Cleveland Browns fan, and I don't know too many of them personally because I live in the New Jersey. And I've met more as I've been on more Browns podcasts. So now I'm bringing on a Twitter guy. He does not have his own podcast, so I thought I'd bring him on to mine. His name is Marcus Harvey, and you can follow him at Marcus Harvey _. And now we will bring him on. We will talk about the Browns on this episode, and on the next episode, we will talk about wide receivers in the NFL draft. Yes, the NFL draft is coming in a couple of weeks.
Hello. I'm well. And yourself?
I am doing well. I have you on today, so that's great. I don't usually, this is my first time in a long time having a guest, literally since last year's draft, because my old computer could not handle doing that kind of stuff. It was like, why are you doing this to me? Like, I did a live stream of the draft, and I couldn't believe that computer held up doing that night, and then it just died further and further. Like, it became less capable to the point where now I can't even do videos anymore on that one. So now I have a new laptop. It's great. Now everything is awesome. New laptop means everything is great.
Rocking and rolling.
Right. So, Marcus, you want to give a little bit of a plug? What do you like? What, your background? You want to tell, put in your Twitter handle, because I didn't plug that in my intro of you.
Yeah. My Twitter handle is Marcus, MarcusHarvey _. Pretty generic, but if you're interested in following me, I comment a lot about all things football. The draft is particularly of interest. I think the process of acquiring new pieces and building a team through the draft is a really interesting portion of the game that continues throughout the year. So that's something that I really tend to follow. But yeah, all things football. I'm a Browns fan, but I really just love the game of football, love talking about it with all different people and try to learn something new every day.
It's a lovely sport. Like, when I finally got into football, I just dove headfirst in, and now all these years later, the draft is such a, it's that thing of hope every year. It's like your team can get better. And we've seen it. We've seen it with the Saints. We've seen it with, the Saints are pretty much the quintessential one, right? Because, we all think about the Saints being like, oh, well, Drew Brees carrying them every year. But, people forget, there was a draft not too long ago that had that draft not happened, that team would probably still suck, because they were a 7-9 team 3 years in a row. Right. And then they had a draft that gave them Ryan Ramczyk and Marshawn Lattimore and Alex Anzalone and Alvin Kamara and Sheldon Rankins. Literally, I'm just naming guys who just are now
Trey Hendrickson.
Trey Hendrickson. Yeah.
Alvin Kamara, Marcus Williams, who they just franchise tagged and worked out, trying to figure out the money situation. Yeah, the draft is a really interesting portion of the game of football because it's so much work that goes into just a couple of days of real process and seeing fans comment about it and different things. So yeah, I love the draft because it's a thing that all fans can connect to, not just playoff games or playoff wins, Super Bowls, but the draft is what you spend the rest of the year talking about.
It's just exciting. And I honestly feel more excited for the night of the draft than I do of the night of the Super Bowl. Because, we already know the two teams in the Super Bowl. As a football fan, it's kind of it's already here. We know who the two guys are. We know the two people playing, or not the two people, but the two quarterbacks. But the draft, it's everybody's game. And
and it only takes a couple Mike Mayock's or Bill Belichick's or Pete Carroll's to really throw a few wrinkles in it, and then it makes it more fun for everybody else. And I'll never forget when Cleveland Farrell was the 4th overall pick, and that just sent the draft and everybody who was covering it into some laughter to start off the night, but created some great situations and things that weren't even possible before that.
Yeah, I was at MetLife Stadium that year because every year they did a draft thing. Even if they weren't hosting the draft, they'll do I think every stadium probably does something for it. And because my buddy's a Jets fan and he has season tickets, so he's like, "Come with me, I get free tickets." And they're like, "That's free anyway. You could just come. It doesn't." He doesn't have anything special, but he'll try to convince me like, "Yo, man, I know people. I'll get you in." And it's like, this was free to begin with. You could have came by yourself.
Right.
But I went a few years, and that year with the Cleveland Farrell pick, I remember sitting in the stands and I look at my phone and it's like, it's not going to be Josh Allen. I'm like, how could it not be Josh Allen? And they're like, well, they didn't like his agent was the same agent as what's
Khalil Mack, probably.
yes, Khalil Mack. Yes, so they just went through that whole thing, and it's such a strange reason. Like, we don't want to deal with that agent. It's like, you guys are morons. I can't believe you guys did this. I'm sorry. I'm never gonna get a job with Mike Mayock, but keep in mind he's probably not gonna have a job too much longer, given how that franchise has been handled. He's definitely the scapegoat. Like John Gruden's there for a while, but Mike Mayock, they're gonna kick him eventually to the curb. But let's talk a little bit more. You're a Browns fan. Let's talk what the Browns need this year, right? There's a lot of talk. Now, granted, they might not need, they really don't necessarily need much. Some would argue they don't, everything that is a quote unquote need is like, it's a need, but it's like, it's not a pressing need.
Right.
I think there's at least one position that's a pressing need.
Yeah.
And it's mainly because that's just a position of depth regardless. But you know, I'll touch on my point on that in a little bit. But like, what do you think about the team? What do you think about the team going into this year? Also, keep in mind we might get Jadeveon Clowney by Wednesday.
Yeah. So upon recording this, like we're still waiting on that news, that workout or the physical that's pending, right? So that'll be an interesting portion of getting ready for the draft and filling a position of need before it comes time to, you know, take the pick or trade the pick or any other situation that could arise, right? For me, I'm just really impressed by Andrew Berry's ability to situate the roster in a much better place than it was 5 weeks ago, than it was 8 weeks ago, or when they were playing for a playoff game against the Kansas City Chiefs, right? So for me to go from Andrew Sendejo and MJ Stewart, who were very serviceable in their roles, but not able to fulfill the full obligations that we needed out of those spots, and the versatility that certain new players could bring, i.e. two of the top defenders from the top defense in the NFL, with Troy Hill coming over and John Johnson the third coming over. You know, those are tremendous additions, and my heart goes out to Olivier Vernon a little bit for his recovery process as his injury happened real late in the year, which was super unfortunate because it rolls again into this year with that Achilles injury. But adding they cut Adrian Claiborne, but adding some more talent along the defensive line with Malik Jackson and
Takk McKinley.
Yeah, Takk McKinley, that will only help the Browns moving forward. So looking forward to that. I think camp will be really interesting, rolling out the bottom of the roster on defense, especially. You know, the Browns are well situated. They have a lot of picks in this draft, so it'll be interesting to see where they favor, you know, high-end talent, or are we trying to unlock unlimited potential? What does that bottom of the roster look like?
The Claiborne thing caught me by surprise, and then instantaneously I'm like, they're definitely going edge rusher in free agency, and like they signed Takk McKinley, and I'm like, Takk McKinley's replacing Claiborne. There's got to be somebody replacing OV.
Yeah.
And we never saw the signing, and I think they were in on all the big pass rusher signings, the Carl Lawsons of the world. But like, think about it. Carl Lawson's been injured a lot. He never played more than 50% of snaps, and he's getting a $15 million a year deal. Bud Dupree's getting $16.5 million a year.
And Trey Hendrickson and Carl Lawson were both one-sided defenders that rarely rotated, you know, had very limited positional versatility at what they showed on their film and in their production. So I think it's really interesting, the situation that we found ourselves in, you know, albeit we still have a couple holes on the roster, like you mentioned, but I think in every situation they're well prepared to enter the draft and not have to go get this guy or have to go get this position by the end of the first night or even through the first 2 days.
And especially if they end up signing Clowney. Like, that puts them in a whole different world, because you now probably are spending less on Clowney than what you would have spent on those other players, because he's probably going to be a one-year deal, which teams usually want a discount on a one-year deal because they can't spread the cap out. And even if they could spread the cap out, they're not getting control, which is why. So with Clowney, they're probably getting him at 10 million or less at this point. Which, because I can't imagine a team wanting to spend more than 10 million. I think the numbers that were thrown around a couple of weeks ago were 7 million up to 10 million in incentives. Don't know if that's what they're aiming for. They might go lower than that. So if they manage to get Clowney, and Clowney, honestly, I think it's just as risky to sign Bud Dupree as it is to sign Clowney, and then Bud Dupree's probably going for twice the rate. Like, you got yourself a 1-year rental on a guy who could easily go opposite Myles Garrett. You also have Tack McKinley, who his first 2 years showed out really well, and you still have the draft to address like an additional pass rusher. And again, this is all pretending like we get Clowney. I could be clowning myself with this, and Clowney could be like, you know what, Walter, I just wanted you to say you wanted me on your team because last year you wanted somebody else's show and said I was one of the most overrated guys in free agency. And listen, I was right. He signed for a $13 million deal, and he didn't do anything last year. I thought there was too much hype last year. I think now it's come back down, and everything's about a medium. Y'all gotta be careful with it's like that in between zone. You gotta be careful. Anyway. Before I start riffing about being right on Clowney to an extent, I thought Clowney was great, and I think Clowney would be a great signing for the Browns now, especially on a cheaper deal. But like you said, like there's you look at the cornerback that they signed, Troy Hill, John Johnson. By the way, Andrew Sendejo, I feel so bad for him because he was basically like a veteran backup to be like here to help teach the defense, and then like Delpit goes down, and they don't really have anybody else on the roster, and they're like, Sendejo, you're gonna be playing free safety. He's like, I was here to eat Cheetos and just hang out in the film room, sir. So I feel bad for Sendejo. He was really kind of, I think, supposed to be like the backup slot corner / maybe we have him play a few snaps. And then it's like, guess what, Make-A-Wish? You're on the field for like 1,000 snaps this year. And he's like, God damn it. Terrence Mitchell was the same way. Terrence Mitchell's like, I'm supposed to be the backup. I played 1,000 snaps this year, and I still got a cheap-ass deal. What do I have to do to get paid? But clearly them not keeping Mitchell was kind of a sign they were going to go a lot. I think that tells you maybe they're looking to go a little bit more man coverage this year.
Yeah, I think that is the biggest telltale sign from that move, right? Mitchell moved on. He hasn't officially signed that contract with the Houston Texans yet, but they agreed to terms a while back. And I really think it is interesting because for large portions of the latter half of the season last year, the Browns defensively were limited by the personnel that they were able to put on the field for injuries or COVID reasons, as the Browns struggled with both of those down the stretch. And especially that was highlighted in the Chiefs game where, the defense couldn't keep up, but the defense did keep up. The offense failed them on that day. And brings us to the next point of when we're going to talk about wide receivers, a little bit about the Browns' perspective about maybe how and what ways the Browns can pursue some different talent to further grow and take that next step. Because in the NFL, if you're remaining stagnant along your wide receiver core, your offensive identity, defenses are going to catch on. That happened in Baltimore this year with Greg Roman and lackluster wide receivers and with a highly talented quarterback that can do everything. So that brings me to this point where Jadeveon Clowney for the Browns just opens up a whole different realm, wide receiver in round one, different things like that to really pursue that next step as an organization and chase the top dogs in the top of the AFC.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it opens up who they might go ahead and get, well, especially if somebody falls, right? Like, you want to be able to take, like, the best player, especially, like, you think about last year with Dallas Cowboys getting CeeDee Lamb at 18. And there's going to be dropping value in this draft like crazy, right? You have Jalen Phillips, who has concussion issues. You have Caleb Farley with the back stuff. You have Jalen Waddle, who's coming off of a massive, he's coming off an injury, didn't get to play half the season, tried to play one game at the end of the year. It did not look like he was back from it. Hasn't gotten to test all off season, so teams might be afraid of that. You have guys who had better 2019s than 2020s because you didn't really have the offseason to work out. And actually, we're going to get into that because we're talking about receivers today, folks, and that's like a big thing for a lot of receivers. Like, I feel like that was half the receiving core that's in this draft is like, this guy's, you have to go back to 2019, you have to go back to 2018 for some of these guys and be like, yo, man, this guy's got good reps on tape. But before we get into that, we'll touch a little bit more on Browns stuff. because you mentioned it right there, is it opens up the world, and one of the things that this team is valued is trading back and garnering assets and garnering high value assets, right? You don't want more 6th round picks, because 6th round picks almost never make the roster. But what you do want is like 2nd round picks, 3rd round picks, even 4th rounders. I think 4th round is like kind of where the drop off eventually dies. It's like that 125 range, and then it's all gone. So I could see them trading back from 26. I think that's what this really frees them up to do, is trade back and get maybe a 2nd rounder next year. Or teams might be a little bit more like, hey, we want to be able to stay in the draft in the 2nd round next year. Maybe we'll give you a 3rd rounder this year and a 4th rounder next year, because next year's draft's going to be really deep. But like any particular thoughts of where you think they might go if they stay at 26, or even if they trade back?
Yeah, so I'm of the belief that they make a little move, whether that be up a little bit or down a little bit. I think both is in the realm of possibilities. If they're moving up, I think it's for one of the top 4 guys, the top 4 receivers. If they're knocking on the doorstep, that can be a real possibility. However, I give that percentage about 25, but for the 75%, I would say either staying or moving back. And in doing that, I have about 12 players in mind across that range, where if 3 of them are sitting on the board and they can move down 5 picks and pick up an extra 2nd or pick up an extra 3rd, to move up a little bit later in the draft, even, with a pick swap or something like that. I really believe that the Browns, could not even be picking on day one, which for a draft that's in Cleveland with a lot of fans that will be excited, will create an interesting situation, but it'll be best for the team, in my opinion.
It would be. I 100% agree, because, again, part of what's made them such a good team is building up assets. And we even saw this with the Eagles, right? The Eagles were at the back around one year. They trade back, and one of those picks became Dallas Goedert. It was probably the only successful pick in like 3 years that Howie Roseman's made. Imagine if he didn't have like one of those extra picks somewhere down the line, you wouldn't be able to make that kind of a pick. So
yeah, and that brings me to the next point. Andrew Berry comes right from that front office and how it's practicing, right? Previous to the Browns, he was working very closely with the Eagles front office during those draft day moves and different things. And we even saw it last year, moving down just 10 picks with the Saints and picking up an extra 3rd this year. That was one of the most outrageous draft trades of last year. Just moving down 10 spots, just missing out on the guy that they likely would have picked. But needless to say, adding that extra 3rd gives them a top 100 pick again this year.
It's funny because but a top 100 picks a lot. Like it's weird when you watch how much the draft stock kind of goes down, as like top 15, like your hit rates, like I think in like the somewhat like 50% range, and then you get out of the you get from the top 15 to the top 50, and it goes down to like 20% hit rate, and then from top 50 to like top 100, it drops even further to like about 10%. So it's like it keeps dropping, and then finally after the 125 range, it's basically like, yeah, you're basically taking shots. It's basically like 2%, 3% shots. So you're just calling dibs. But and not only that, but Andrew Berry was here back when they did the huge trade back like several years ago. Like he was part of the front office in 2016 that did the trade back with Wentz, and then the following year with Deshaun Watson at 12. So like he's very adept on what garnering picks will do for a team and build up roster talent. So what are players that you would take for the Browns at 26? Like you have the option to trade down. Two versions of this question. 26, you have an option to trade down, maybe garner an extra day 2 pick this year or next year. Or you can take one of these players. Who are they at 26? And then we'll do the next bit at 26 if there's just no options.
So for me, 2 players at 26, or 3 players, I'll make it 3. Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah from Notre Dame. I think his skill set is far and above any other replacement value, like the next tier of what it could be. And with the current roster and how it's situated and the desire for the Browns to get faster, Owusu-Koramoah would fit that mold tenfold. And so I really was impressed by him, his speed, his ability to drop into coverage. I'm of the belief that linebacker is here or there, but he offers so much skill as a positionless defender that can truly help out the defense in so many different aspects, whether that be chasing Lamar Jackson after the one of the goals for me this offseason were how the Browns were going to beat the Ravens, and getting more speed on defense is exactly that. So Owusu-Koramoah does that for me. Then on top of that, I look at Rashad Bateman, a wide receiver from Minnesota. I think he's a remarkable talent. Working in a pro-style offense in a colder environment, as an outside receiver, as a slot, measured a little bit smaller than people had anticipated, both weight and height. But to me, that was never what was drawing me to him. It's his route running. It's his ability to separate and present a big target for a wide receiver in those situations. Then the last pick, in my opinion, would be looking at Caleb Farley. Caleb Farley is somebody who I had looked at a year ago before he decided to opt out, and the skill set just gravitated me towards him. Big corner, able to do zone coverage off man very well. I think he's a great complement to the current DB room, where we're a bit smaller, with Denzel Ward being the other dominant corner in the room. So just by coming in, I know that there are injury concerns with him. However, from what I've been able to see, a lot of doctors have been giving him very good news and hopeful news for what that next step into the NFL looks like. But those three guys are three that I have circled high and above the rest at 26.
Yeah, he had a microdiscectomy recently, which actually I know somebody who went through that and played college football, and he said he could be back by May. Like, it's not that big of a deal. But then again, any kind of surgery that's not happening on yourself is always not a big deal. Right? It's like, yeah, that guy had a surgery on his kneecap. That's not a big deal. How would you know? It's not your kneecap. Like, it can go any which way, but it sounds like you're right. He's getting some clearance on it. The other thing is he had something regarding his sciatic nerve last year. I think he had a surgery regarding that when he was, and that was like why he missed the last two games of the 2019 season. He also tore his ACL a few years ago. The torn ACL doesn't worry me as much because that's usually something, unless there's something in addition to that. Like, again, I'm not a doctor, and I don't even play one on TV, so I really can't give a lot of insight onto the medical aspects of it. But from what I'm hearing, I agree with you. Provided that, and listen, the NFL has their own doctors. They're going to send him to, they're going to get the MRIs. They're going to talk to his doctors. They're going to clear HIPAAs and hippos as well. And they're going to go ahead and look at it, and they're going to be like, listen, we don't think this is a recurring issue. Or they're going to be like, listen, it might be a recurring issue, but dude, this guy's good. And to the extent that it's recurring, you're not going to get this level of a player anywhere else. So I kind of agree with you. I like Caleb Farley a lot. I'm less worried about his back injury than I would be, say, worried about Jalen Phillips and his concussion issues. Which I love Jalen Phillips. I think he's probably the best pass rusher in this class. We're not talking pass rushers, I know. I tried getting you on that conversation. Like, listen, I actually really like the wide receivers, man. Let's talk wide receivers. I don't want to get into none of that politics stuff with edge rushers. So that's why we're talking wide receivers, everybody. I'm kidding. He was full on go for whatever I told him to do. I was just like, this is kind of let's take this fun little
Football,
string on this.
It doesn't matter what we're talking about. It's just football.
It's all football. It's all draft. And so, for instance, for me, I think if there was three guys I wouldn't want to trade down for. So, you know what? It's funny because the Jadeveon Clowney thing changes a lot, right? And especially depends on how teams value some of these edge rushers and how they value. Like, you're right. Caleb Farley is just a different talent, right? I like him so much. You're right. Like, if he's there at 26, even if you had an offer to trade back, I might be like, you know what? The differential between Farley and the next corner is not it's huge. It's not close, especially if Greg Newsome's already off the board. If J.C. Horn and Surtain are probably automatically off the board. They're probably going top 12 now. Oh my God, I'm so sad about the J.C. Horn thing now because J.C. Horn, man, he was fun. He was very fun, but he's not getting near 26. I don't think.
I think his floor is 16. To the Cardinals. I don't think the Cardinals can do anything else except either trade that pick for him or take him and add him to the defense in a team that's just looking to win now.
That might be a thing, man. Mock draft that. Everybody should be mock drafting that because that's that I like an idea. They even try to trade up because again, there's only like kind of two corners that you could really feel truly safe with. Greg Newsome even has a little bit of injury concerns. He's never played a full season in college football. I think he's always at least missed 3 games, so that was always kind of a worrisome thing with Greg Newsome. That might be more worrisome to me than Caleb Farley's thing, because like his thing, like at the end of the year, is groin issues. He had a couple of other things over the years, so I'm a little bit more nervous with Greg Newsome, especially given like the ceiling of Caleb Farley being like Caleb Farley could be like almost Jalen Ramsey esque. So I agree with you there. I think at one point I probably would say Azeez Ojulari is where at that spot I still love Azeez Ojulari. That was like my draft crush from January till now, and I'm still high on the Azeez Ojulari train. But but say no pass rushers go until, which would be insane. But imagine like no pass rushers go. Pretend we live in an imaginary universe where like everybody just does not agree with these pass rushers. They all have, and they do all kind of have weird warts, like all of them. So there's like 10 of them. Ojulari, you can get to 26 and be like, well, I like Ojulari, but there's also 6 other guys we have rated like not far off from him, and we're getting offers for next year's a second round pick next year. So you might be on the right train of thought here with those 3 picks.
Yeah, and right before we get into wide receivers, that was exactly the thinking for me of picking those 3 guys at 26, because I like a little bit of that range right after 40 until about 70 of edge rushers that are there, whether that be Joseph Osai or whether that be Patrick Owe. I really am a fan of his game. I think the no sacks in 2020 is an anomaly, just as we were talking a little bit about production for wide receivers is down in this weird season. But also Smith from Northern Iowa is another fan. Ellerson Smith.
Yes.
Showed out at the Senior Bowl, 22 years old. He's a big fan. I'm a big fan of his in his ability to come in that bottom of round 2, top of round 3, or right there at 89 and 91 when the Browns pick. If he's on the board, there won't be one player that I'm wishing for more than Ellerson Smith right there in that range.
I also, it's weird because like there's guys who I like who I know they won't take, and we'll talk about at least one of them today when we talk about wide receivers. But like Carlos Basham's probably going to go in the day 2 range. They probably won't go for him because he's a little bit older. He's like 23, going to be 24. But he had some really good tape, and this year was a little bit more down than the previous years. But even still, his athleticism shows on tape. If he learned to be a little bit more like just go through the guy kind of deal, he would be a whole different level of player. So I liked him. I also listened to an interview with his D-line coach at Wake Forest. He was very much. It was a very fun interview to listen to on that. But like you said, like Owe. And by the way, Owe I'm a huge fan of. That's a guy who, like, at some points when, again, there wasn't rumors of them signing Jadeveon Clowney, I was like, I would be fine if they took Jason Owe. And then there's like Patrick Jones, who's probably going to be there towards the end of the second round. And then there's Joe Tryon, who I know you don't like, who I don't think I would take in the second round or the third round. I would maybe take Joe Tryon at that 91 pick. If they didn't take an edge rusher, if they trade down, accumulate all these picks, it's like Tryon at 91. Well, we didn't take an edge rusher. This guy's more developmental. But I know you have your own opinion on him.
Yeah.
Which you can share right now.
I think he's a really interesting prospect. He has really active hands working through blocks and different things. Opted out in 2020 due to a lot of Pac-12 players or prospects opted out because they were the last to, come back to play, and their season was more abridged and shorter than the rest of college football. But for me, yeah, I think he's a fine player and would benefit from not being thrust into that starting position. As a rookie, I think he's most successful if he's just a pass rusher to start. As a run defender, I think he can get lost sometimes running right by his blocks and different things, but or right past the running back even a couple times I saw on film. So I wish him the best, and I hope he can get a good situation to find himself in. For me, if he's going to go out of the top 2 rounds, I think the Buccaneers at the bottom of round 2 are a sweet spot for him to come in and be a situational pass rusher for them, standing next to Jason Pierre-Paul and opposite of their other edge.
Shaq Barrett. Yeah.
Signed him. That only creates more chaos with Vita Vea and Ndamukong Suh in the middle.
Yeah, that might be a really good landing spot for him. Again, like Tryon, I'm like, I don't like the round 1 hype or top 50 hype. That's a little too scary for me. I'm like, there's guys in this draft class that way more, whether you're like our buddy Osai, who, even if I'm not huge on Osai, I like Osai as a day 2 guy, second round pick. I don't care much for him I think he'll probably go in the first round. He has solid production too. It wasn't, but I'm not as high on Osai as some other people are. There's some things he has a lot of Bud Dupree to his game, which if you like Bud Dupree, that's great. And then if you're not a big fan of Bud Dupree, I think that's kind of the questions that you have to kind of ask.
Osai is an energizer bunny. He's running around the field faster than everybody else. He wants it more than everybody else, and that's the first note that I wrote down when watching him.
The
really
motor's
impressed
there.
by that. Yeah, and I think with his youth and his athletic traits, as he tested really well, and with that production that he got from just what he was doing already, not really super refined in different things, the sky's the limit for him, as opposed to a guy like Owe, who has all the traits, a little bit of the tape, not as much production. I'm all over Osai if it's anywhere close to one another.
Thank you, Mr. Marcus Harvey. Check out part 2 tomorrow or tonight, depending on when this releases. Yes, check out part 2 with Marcus Harvey, where we talk about wide receivers, folks. Wide receivers. So go ahead, subscribe, like, follow. Go ahead and give him a follow at Marcus Harvey _ on the Twitterverse. And again, you can follow me at BROJO. Death is in the end of life. Punch a delicious drink you drink in the summer. And you can follow the podcast at Draftvice on Twitter, at Draftvice _football on Instagram, and any other platform. It's usually Draftvice. So there you go.
We're on to
When I woke up this morning, I was feeling pretty dangerous.
About the past and about the future.